Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Is everyone awake?
Yep.
Yeah.
Out of our coma after watching that video? You know, the sad thing is, the examples from that clip weren't the most ridiculous I've heard. Reality is much funnier and sadder than that, unfortunately. And that's one of the major issues we have to worry about, overcoming those obstacles preventing bike lane installation, and that is the premise of my presentation today. Let's start with some of the biases against the bike lanes. Generally speaking, there's a prevalent theme that we see from those individuals who are opposing bike lanes, and that's that cars belong on roads. That's it. That bikes shouldn't be out there at all, so they've got no business being there. State law says something different, but it's still a prevalent opinion that is working against us and working against the concept of bike lanes in general. A lot of this is just fear of the unknown, and let's say ignorance. And ignorance is not necessarily limited to rich white women. It's a broader, it paints a broader stroke, but there are certain types that do tend to come out and oppose bike lanes at public meetings. There's another concern is that people say, well, why would we put bike lanes? There are no bikes out there already. If you're going to look at a major arterial street, bikes shouldn't be there. Look, no one rides out there. If there should be bike lanes, we would see bike lanes already. But I have kind of a retort to that. If you were to perform a vehicle count out here in the middle of a dune, how many cars would you see? Probably not too many. How many bikes would you expect to see out on a street like this? Probably not too many. There might be a few very brave individuals. There are always outliers, but you're not going to see many because it's not, the infrastructure does not support bike lanes, does not support bicyclists in general. So, generally speaking, we hear the cases, why shouldn't we not install bike lanes, particularly on arterial streets? I know a lot of cities have policies where it's okay to install the bike lanes on collector streets, that's fine and good. But as soon as you look at arterial streets, oh no, nope, they don't belong there. And I certainly don't mean to offend anybody who might have that opinion, so this is an open discussion.
You're safe here.
I'm safe here, yes. I always have to watch my words usually where I am, but I can say whatever I want here, right?
Great.
So, no, I am actually still going to curb what I say. I have to go back to work on Monday. So some of the cases against that high-speed, high-volume traffic is dangerous. I'm not necessarily denying that high-speed, high-volume traffic is dangerous. That is true. Obviously, if someone is hit by a car, that's not a good thing. But is this reason to say that bikes should not be out on a street entirely? Another argument is that young bicyclists should not be in the busy streets. That bicyclists should use sidewalks. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there are those individuals that say we shouldn't have bike lanes at all. Because by state law, bikes can assume the full lane, so bikes should be in the vehicle lanes. That's obviously the other end of the spectrum. And one of the other arguments we hear is that we can only get bike lanes in for short distances on those arterial streets. It's not even worth doing, so let's not do it. And finally, the terrible reality, those travel lanes might have to be reduced, narrowed down to accommodate bike lanes. And this would be a horrible thing, of course, because we have to have our 12-foot wide lanes, right? And I've seen that, I fought this on many occasions where, sorry, we can't get bike lanes, our two-way center lane has to be 12 feet wide. Why does it have to be 12 feet wide? There's no reason it has to be 12 feet, well, that's our standard. Okay. And sometimes our standard prevents us from thinking and innovating and doing anything different because we're locked to a standard that's sometimes arbitrary. So my responses to each of those arguments would be, first off, the speeds and volumes don't affect the legality of bike use. Now I have a little asterisk here because yes, on a 65-mile-an-hour freeway, you may have restrictions that don't allow bikes out on certain roadways. But generally speaking, just because your traffic is 45 or 50 miles an hour doesn't mean bikes can't use it legally. The other thing that I really like to point out is that bicyclists will use the facilities to your comfort level. If there is a bike lane present and you are not comfortable riding in that bike lane, what are you going to do? Anyone? Right on the sidewalk, take the full lane, whatever your option is, you have choices. And that's what we're trying to do, is make sure people have choices. And by installing bike lanes on ideally all of our arterial and collector streets, we're providing those choices. So again, we want to provide options for people riding bicycles. One of the other things, those short distances. Often, you really don't need a long distance on an arterial street. Yet, yes, there are bike commuters, and I'm sure a lot of bike commuters are here today. But there are a lot of bike trips that could be made that you only need a short connect from a collector street with low speeds and low volumes to get to a store or a service or a shop or one of your destinations. You may only need to go half a mile or even a quarter of a mile on that arterial street. But the question is, do you have to do that riding on the sidewalk and crossing a bunch of driveways, or can you do that in a bike lane? So short distances can be beneficial with bike lanes. And the last point that I kind of made already is most of those vehicle lanes are too wide anyway. We don't really need to have a 14-foot lane for vehicles. In fact, a 14-foot lane, some could argue, is worse than an 11-foot lane as far as bicyclists concerned, because I know I've personally ridden in a 14-foot lane and I feel like I'm pretty good until the cars driving by practically scrape my handlebars as I'm riding down. So 14 feet for a lane is a little bit of you're kind of in a twilight zone there between having enough room and not having enough room. And I personally am not a huge fan of those 14-foot wide curb lanes. Now that's without bike lanes. So from Peoria's bicycle development plan, we have a policy and practice to coordinate planning, design, and construction of all ongoing maintenance and capital improvements projects to incorporate bicycle lanes. Our goal is 100% of our arterial streets and collector streets. Now, we can't necessarily achieve this, but this is our pie-in-the-sky goal. The idea is to have the bike infrastructure available everywhere on all these streets, and of course, for local streets, there's not really any need for bike lanes. So, what are the main problems that you face? Of course, money. We don't have enough money. There's no funding. So, some of the solutions: ask for money. That's the first point. Ask for money. If you don't ask for money or apply for funds, you'll never have any money. It's very simple. So, do what you can with the resources you have available. If it means go even a few years out into the future, then do that. Seek grants, seek other sources of funding. Now this, of course, is from more of a government perspective. So if you're from the role of an advocate, I'd say contact your city representatives and ask, what are they doing for bicycle infrastructure? What are their funding sources? What are their plans for these projects? Be heard. Be vocal. Be like those ladies in the video, except from another perspective. Because honestly, people who are loud get heard. It's kind of sad, but that's really what it is. Loud voices are heard. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the people represented by this community have too much common sense and are too tactful than behooves us. Because loud voices do often get heard. No one's recording this, right? Okay. Randy, you won't tell me, right? Okay, good. He's with Peoria as well. Okay, so one of the other problems, there's no destinations or there's no other bike facilities we're connecting to on a certain street segment. Okay, so the solution is start somewhere. If you never start, it'll never happen. I know earlier in my career at Peoria, the same situation arose where there was a short stretch of street where we had an opportunity to install bike lanes, but the same problem came up. It's only a mile. It doesn't connect to anything on the other side. Let's not do it. And we didn't do it. And then a few years later, another street segment came in that would have connected to that. And well, that would have been nice if we had installed bike lanes on that segment. Then we could have just kept it going. But I have learned over time there's kind of an in-between option, and that is design for the bike lanes. Make those curb lanes extra wide. Just hold off installing the bike lanes. And one example that I can think of in Peoria that's out there right now is 75th Avenue from Cactus to Thunderbird. Public Works had recently, within the last year or two, completed a street rehab project. The problem was we had two intersections, 75th Avenue in Peoria and 75th Avenue in Cactus, where there was going to be an intersection improvement project that's going to tear up the whole street. So Public Works wasn't including those intersections. So if I put in bike lanes, I would have to drop them a few hundred feet in advance of those major arterial intersections, which is generally speaking not a good thing. So what we did instead is designed with those extra wide curb lanes, and we've waited. And those extra wide curb lines are out there right now, and when our projects are finally completed in a couple of years here, in a year or two, then we'll finally be able to get those bike lanes through 2 or 3 miles all at one time. Another problem, not enough road width. Reduce your lane width. That's easy. There aren't many streets that I work with, that I look at, that I can't figure out some way to get in bike lanes. There are occasions when you just cannot do it, but usually you can get them in there. And you can do that by reducing those lane widths. And I go down to a minimum of 10 feet, not in every case, because there's a lot of negative connotations with individuals with a 10-foot lane, but I will go down to a 10-foot two-way left turn lane, especially if there's not a lot of driveways and interaction in that two-way left turn lane. And it's been argued against me that it's not a good thing to do this, but I will go down to a 10-foot lane next to a bike lane. So you may have a 16-foot lane, 6 feet is bike lane and 10 feet is the travel lane. I said, well, it's not good to have a 10-foot lane next to a bike lane, but my argument is it's certainly better to have a 10-foot lane next to a 6-foot bike lane than to say, forget it, we're just going to provide a 14-foot curb lane and let people figure it out. So we are at least giving a designated area. So if you've got a different opinion, I'm actually welcome to hear it. And I do respond, and we do react to what we hear from the cycling public as to what we should be doing with our infrastructure. Some of the other things you can do is provide a widened shoulder. In some cases, if you don't have enough width and you don't have a curb, it's just an edge of your asphalt, you might be able to widen out that asphalt a little bit more to provide enough width. Road diets. Is everyone familiar with the term road diet? Okay. In a nutshell, it's something that induces absolute horror and anger from individuals in the community. Because what you do is, in a lot of cases, you take away travel lanes, vehicle lanes, to do something for pedestrians and bicyclists. It's absolutely horrifying. And in some cases, you just do not have enough width for bike lanes any way you slice it. So there is an option called a sharrow, and I think Phoenix has a number of locations where there are sharrows installed. But basically, it's a symbol that looks kind of like a double chevron with a bike symbol, and it lets you know that bikes have preferred use in that lane. It notifies the driving public to expect the bikes to be using that full lane. It doesn't necessarily change anything about the law. It just is an extra notification to the driving public and to the cyclists themselves that they should be taking the full lane. So I didn't do this graphic. I just thought it's kind of cool. Ask, imagine, plan, create, improve. That's the goal. It seemed inspirational, so I used this. But generally speaking, for implementation, what you want to do is first get support from the community and elected officials. And now, as my audience here is mixed, I would also say, as bicycle advocates, make your voices known to your elected officials and city planners and engineers. Don't be silent. Don't expect things to get better if you don't take an active role. Now, from the city perspective, a good next step is to adopt a complete streets policy. If you have a practice that you implement bike lanes or pedestrian facilities, but you don't have anything in writing and anything adopted by council, as soon as there's the minorest, slightest, most tiny hiccup, or there's a little bit of an extra cost to a developer, guess what goes? Bike lanes go, sometimes the sidewalks go, all the other amenities, and usually it's so we can squeeze in a few more houses to get the most, squeeze the greatest number of dollars out of a piece of land. So without a policy, those practices can shrivel pretty quickly when contested, and they do. You want to create implementation policies based on the complete streets policy. and continually adjust and update those policies as times change and as you're challenged. If you're challenged and you run into a case where something fell short, their existing policies didn't cover a situation, develop new policies or adapt them. And keep building on successes and keep pushing. You just have to, it's a never-ending battle. So what we do in Peoria is we actually install most of our bike lanes through coordination with street maintenance when they do their regularly scheduled maintenance on streets. Because what that gives us is a fresh black surface when they go out and do a mill and overlay or a micro seal treatment, basically a new asphalt treatment to the street. So that's a fresh black canvas for us to paint on. So we always jump on those opportunities to see if we can retrofit to install bike lanes and make other changes while we're at it to improve the design of the striping on the streets. So we'll develop those striping plans in-house. We coordinate with street maintenance continually to find out, has their schedule changed? What are they planning on doing? We'll fund the additional work. So if we're gonna incur additional costs to street maintenance through some changes we're making, we actually, through some funds called Community Works Funds, will fund those increases that would have gone above and beyond what they had funded for their maintenance. And we've had a lot of successes. These are a couple examples. I mentioned 75th Avenue, Peoria to Cactus before, and this is an example of a graphic I prepared. This is not an actual CAD drawing, it's just kind of a rough idea that shows the crew when they're doing the striping, the lane widths that they would be installing after they complete their project. There's another example on Cotton Crossing, just north of Grand Avenue. And it's a case where we had way too many lanes. We had 3 lanes in each direction on a street that carries maybe 5,000 vehicles a day. Massively overbuilt. So when there was a micro seal planned for the street, we were able to drop one of the lanes and put in bike lanes. And I don't know if you can see it really well, but we ended up having a little bit of extra space. We had to figure out what to do with it. That's okay. But we were able to drop the number of lanes because it definitely was not necessary. So some retrofit examples when we have a chance to work with those fresh black surfaces. Most of the older arterial streets in Peoria are 64 feet wide, and this was the old configuration with 14-foot curb lanes, and all the other lanes were 12 feet wide. So you've got a few different options when you work with that canvas. You can squeeze down your lanes to 11 feet, put in 5-foot bike lanes and a 10-foot two-way left turn lane. Now when we have used this mostly, it was prior to the 2012 AASHTO update that recommends the 6-foot wide bike lanes when you're including the gutter pan. So we try not to do this except in cases where we just have to. We've got no other option. But we do ideally like to go for the 6-foot bike lanes. A minor alternate option for this is to go with the 10-foot curb lanes and leave that two-way left turn lane 12 feet. And again, this has been more common for most of our recent retrofits, where we just drop that two-way left turn lane and the curb lanes down to 10 feet wide, so we can provide the 6-foot bike lanes after the project is completed. We have a lot of other streets that were built. Mostly these are collector streets that were built with 3 lanes, a little bit generous lanes, and a two-way left turn lane. So we've got a couple different options. One, we can squeeze everything down to 10 feet and provide the 5-foot bike lanes. This is a little tight, but generally speaking, these are low-speed, low-volume collector streets, so this isn't necessarily a bad thing. And if anything, it actually helps encourage slower speeds when you go down to a 10-foot lane. The other option is to look at, do we even need that two-way left turn lane at all? There's a lot of cases where, frankly, we don't, because what's the worst thing that can happen? If a vehicle has to briefly slow down to make a left turn on the street, the vehicles behind them have to do what, God forbid, slow down a little bit instead of just passing them by at whatever speed they're driving. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not saying this works in every case, but there's a lot of cases where we have a two-way left turn lane where really we don't even need it. So this gives the option of providing the nice, the more generous 6 or even 7-foot bike lanes. This was an example we recently completed in North Peoria, Cibola Vista, and it kind of melts into Joe Max and then curves around at the other end to Pinnacle Vista, where we had just that exact configuration, 1 lane each direction with a two-way left turn lane. And after the micro seal, we dropped that two-way left turn lane to put in the 6-foot bike lanes. This was an example on 83rd Avenue, Thunderbird to Cactus Road. Again, we had the 64-foot wide street, and we opted for the 12-foot two-way left turn lane, 10-foot curb lanes, and 5-foot bike lanes. We're actually going to get a chance to do this one again. This was following a full street rehab, and now they're going to be doing a micro seal this next fiscal year. So we actually might just drop this down to 10 foot so we can widen the bike lanes to 6 feet. Now, one thing I want to point out is there was a segment of 83rd Avenue from Cactus to Peoria that was also done at the same time. We provided 15-foot curb lanes. At the last minute, we decided to hold off on installing the bike lanes because we had a number of catch basins that were a very old design that actually jut out 4 feet from the gutter. The grates themselves are not bike friendly at all. The concrete aprons are very steep, have a very steep cross slope, and they're cracked up. So what we're doing is this summer we're going to retrofit all 11 of those catch basins. And so when Public Works does their micro seal next fiscal year, they'll be ready to go, and we'll finally put those bike lanes in all the way down to Peoria Avenue. So that's a pretty expensive retrofit, but it's definitely worth it to remove those hazards from the bike lanes. Otherwise, you'd have something jutting out that's basically a massive obstruction 4 feet into a 5 or 6 bike lane, 5 or 6 foot bike lane, which is really, that's just not a good scenario. So this is just a couple photos of 83rd Avenue immediately south of Thunderbird. It's what it looked like before, and we put the bike lanes in, and you know, it worked. We didn't get any complaints. Didn't get any feedback at all, actually. This is another example of a retrofit on Happy Valley Parkway at the Agua Fria River. This was an area that was identified in our bicycle development plan public meetings as, I'm not going to repeat what they referred to the bridge as, because I just can't bring myself to say it as a city official. But they didn't like it, and it implied certain negative connotations about the likelihood of one surviving the trip. What we had is, first off, the speed of the traffic out there is around 65 miles an hour. The 85th percentile speed, that's the speed at or below 85% of the driving public is traveling. So 65 miles an hour. It was posted 50 at the time, now it's posted at 45. We had 2 foot wide shoulders and these little barriers that you could topple over if you would actually hit them the right way. No one ever did, to my knowledge. What we had done through a project with Maricopa County through a special projects fund program project was to raise the barriers and adjust the lane widths, squeeze them down from 12 to 11, and squeeze down this 8-foot buffer that didn't really serve too much of a purpose other than separating two-way traffic, down to 4 feet to provide 6-foot shoulders that later became true bike lanes through coordination with the county. And this is what it looked like before and after. It really doesn't look as impressive as it should. And we've actually heard from a bike club that's up north called the Trilogy Bike Club. This is an example of a group of advocates that are very vocal and they're heard by our elected officials. They get stuff done. And because they get stuff done, we're not done with this bridge. There's a couple things that are happening. In the interim, we're going to be installing some radar feedback signs that tell you your speed, as well as some warning signs that say watch for bikes. That's an interim effort. I personally don't think a sign that says watch for bikes is going to really make anything a whole lot better for cyclists out there, but it is something visual. What I do think is going to be more valuable are those radar feedback signs because, again, the speeds were about 65 miles an hour. So if people had reminders of how fast they were going, perhaps there might be some speed reductions and people realize how fast they're going. One would hope. But ultimately, we're accelerating the widening of the bridge. And in fact, it was going to be some way out, probably close to my retirement is when it was originally going to be widened. And now we're looking at, I think we're actually in design next fiscal year, and I think we're going to construction in FY19. So it was greatly accelerated. And what we're going to do as part of this bridge widening is provide nice, wide, separated sidewalks with the barriers, as well as bike lanes, so that way cyclists have a choice whether to ride in the bike lane or to go up onto the wide sidewalk when they're crossing the bridge. But again, that was advocacy that pushed that issue. Another example, Terramore Boulevard and Desert Moon Way. This was a road diet. We had 2 lanes in each direction with an extra wide median, 11-foot lanes, and we had constant speeding problems out there and concerns of people driving and passing each other quickly. There were narrow sidewalks right up against the curb. And so we had actually seen some streets in Glendale that had a similar width, but had a treatment where there was a 7-foot wide or 8-foot wide, kind of a shared use shoulder for parking or bikes, and 1 lane in each direction. So we thought that looks pretty good, we'll do that. And when people would call, about complaining about speeding, which they always called and complained about speeding on Terramore and Desert Moon, we would say, we've got a project in the works. It wasn't very long until the word got to the HOA, and they had their lawyer send us a cease and desist letter, because they said, we want our lanes, you're gonna make traffic horrible for us. We fought it for about a year, and thankfully we had the full support of our then council member, now mayor, Kathy Carlott, and we pushed ahead. And after the implementation of the road diet, the sky didn't fall. In fact, we talked to a number of individuals. We noticed there were more people out there, like humans interacting with their environment. It was kind of amazing to see out there, people walking and riding bikes. And we just asked several of them what they thought of the changes, and they said, initially they had opposed the road diet when it was presented to them by the HOA, and all the negatives were brought up, and they said once they see it, they actually liked it. So that was a case where we had a lot of opposition from people that were just dead set against it for whatever reason. And even after the project was completed, they still thought it was bad, even though we observed traffic and saw no negative impacts to drivers. There was a negative impact because the cars that were driving 30 miles an hour, which is the posted speed, were actually creating obstructions for the people that wanted to drive 45 miles an hour, and they couldn't pass them anymore because there wasn't an extra lane to do that. But remember, that was the entire reason we were doing this. One of the big reasons was speeding. But frankly, the people in the community wanted to speed. They didn't want to be slowed down by the little old lady driving too slow, which would be the speed limit. So this is a picture of what it looked like immediately after the project. And now actually this little slurry stripe is faded out to where you can't even tell it was ever done. It was a huge success, but it was very hard fought. Then there was another example of an arterial street that only runs about. Yes, sir.
Sir, was that slurry stripe, was its only purpose just to black out what was the lane?
Yes.
Mark, okay, so when you see those, is it a fair bet that that's what they were doing, is just some sort of?
A lot of times, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we figured we'd push on with that. There was a street we were implementing a microsale project, 107th Avenue north of Olive. 107th Avenue doesn't go very far north of Olive or very far south of Northern. Very low traffic volumes. We said this is a perfect candidate for a road diet. We don't need 5 lanes. The 2 lanes each direction and a 2-way left turn lane. So what we decided to do is reduce the travel lanes, and then we had about a 10-foot buffer lane. We didn't know what to do with it. There are a lot of golf carts that are in that area, but there's no legal provision for providing special lanes for golf carts. So we just kind of striped it out and had it as a non-used area. And this was the graphic that we showed to people, that this is a no vehicle area. We did have golf carts that would drive in it, and it was a little bit of a question mark for police. Do they cite them or do they not? We thought it was generally innocuous having golf carts use that area, but we didn't do the enforcement, so we didn't have to worry about it. But there were questions about that. We also had graphics to show how the area of conflict when students cross at one of the intersections, 107th Avenue and Butler, which there's a nearby school, Country Meadows, that actual area where they would encounter vehicles went down from 64 to 68 feet down to 34 feet. So there were also fewer potential conflicts between vehicles with the reduced section or the reduced number of lanes at this intersection. And the people were livid. They were livid. They demanded a meeting immediately because they wanted their extra lanes. Why? Why do you guys think? because the little old ladies that were driving too slow and they couldn't pass them. That's why. They said it was terrible when they'd get caught behind a car driving too slow. Again, the posted speed limit. The problem is you look at this road and what does it say to you? Drive fast. Exactly. So it was an uphill battle. I'll spare you the details. I lost a few years of my life, I think, fighting it. We had a public meeting and they were brandishing pitchforks and burning effigies of me and the other city staff. We said, hold on, let's just let it go for 6 months. We'll come back and do some additional studies and see what you guys think. We thought, surely once they get a chance to get used to this, they'll see how wonderful it is. And they demanded the meeting 3 months later, and we had to give them the choice, basically, that we could reverse the road diet and keep, post the speed higher, and realize that we couldn't really do anything else to improve safety and speeding on the street, or we could leave it like it is and take some, do some other measures, because we could downgrade it to a collector street and make some other changes. And they voted overwhelmingly, and there were about 100. I think there were about 100 people that showed up for this meeting. They voted overwhelmingly. We want it to stay in arterial street. We want the extra lanes. And we said, okay. And then immediately after, someone said, and we want a 4-way stop at 107th and Butler and slower speeds. Those were mutually exclusive choices. You choose one or the other. And but it's funny that people could say we want more lanes, wider lanes, we want an auto-centric design, yet we want it to be slower and safer. It really doesn't work that way. There was one success, at least, that came out of this, is when this street was retrofitted, we put in bike lanes that weren't there before, and after we lost we had to put the extra lanes back in, we still had the bike lanes. So, partial success. And this is just an overview of the implementation since our bicycle development plan was completed in 2007, how we've grown in bike lanes. And these are center line miles of bike lanes. And it says percent of streets, that's for all arterial and collector streets. So when we started about 2007, we had about 50 miles of bike lanes on about 25% of our arterial and collector streets. 2009 was a big year because of the ARA projects. We were able to get in a lot of extra bike lanes. And I just put every 2 years, you can see we've just had steady growth in the number of bike lanes and the percentage of bike lanes on arterial and collectors. You see a little odd drop in the percent of bike lanes, and that's because that year we reclassified several local streets as collectors that had no striping at all, so that brought our percent down. So the takeaways, both as city officials and as advocates, we need to be creative and don't always accept just what the standard is. Look at what is the purpose of the standard and can it change and still be safe. We need to get the support of elected officials and the public. So you as the public need to make your voices known as well to those elected officials. That drives a lot of city policy and practice. We need to have written policies and guidelines so we make sure that we don't cut bicycle infrastructure at the first opportunity of any complication. And we need to coordinate with our internal and external stakeholders to make sure that we are building what we say we're going to build. It's one thing to have a policy, but if you don't follow it, it really doesn't do a whole lot of good. And sometimes we have policies and guidelines that just are not followed. They collect dust. So we need to make sure we're following those policies. And without the support, these trends could reverse. I've got a story I'm not going to tell of a certain roadway, collector roadway, that's going to go through with absolute minimum sidewalks, no bike lanes, so extra lanes can be put in for no reason. And it's something that actually affected me very personally. And we didn't have support, and unfortunately, we tend to get support from very vocal people who frankly have no business giving their opinions and making their opinions known. But after all, we are the elected officials serve the public, and we as government officials get our marching orders from the elected officials and the people in general. So we do what we're told. The last thing, those road diets, man, those are a hard sell. as amazing as they are and the awesome benefits of road diets, they're a hard sell. And really the reason is, when you have a public meeting or you're seeking public opinion for road diets, who shows up? The people from the video. The people from the video show up. The people who think, yeah, that's a pretty good idea, they don't show up because they think, yeah, sounds good. You know, but they don't have the fire, and so those opinions are not heard. So I have the fear that very often the very vocal minority opinion is the one that's heard, and we design streets based on that, that very small and small-minded opinion. All right, so I guess at this time we're open for any questions.